Good evening. On behalf of the City of San Fernando, I'd like to welcome you to the community meeting for the San Fernando Citywide Parking Management Master Plan. This is our second community meeting. I'm Catherine Padilla Otañez, and I'm a member of the KOA project team. I'd like to first go over how to participate in our virtual meeting. So let's go to the next slide. Now, I'll say this all in English, and then we'll move to Spanish, just to let you know the meeting is available in Spanish and English. So how to participate in the meeting. I want to let you know that this meeting is being recorded and can be watched on demand at the City YouTube channel. Spanish interpretation is available by clicking on the interpretation icon at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar. And to do that, you hold your cursor over at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and you'll see a little world interpretation icon come up. Click on that and you'll be transferred to the Spanish station. We have an interpreter speaking live time, translate every word of this meeting. Just to let you know, as presenters, we'll be speaking a little more slowly to allow for that interpretation. And to submit a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom again of your toolbar. For participants who joined by phone, you can text your questions and comments to 213-340-8879. I'll repeat that. Text your questions to 213-340-8879. You can do that anytime during this meeting. Thelma, would you please go over this, how to participate in Spanish for us?
Con mucho gusto. Muy buenas noches y bienvenidos. Queremos decirle que si usted desea escuchar esta reunión en español, por favor, en la parte de abajo de su pantalla de Zoom, usted va a encontrar un mundo que dice Interpretation abajo. Si usted pulsa ese mundo, va al canal de español y podrá escuchar a nuestro intérprete que está interpretando simultáneamente. Muchas gracias.
And just to let you know, Thelma Herrera is a key member of the team as well. Let's go to the next slide. We'll briefly walk you through the agenda. We'll begin with welcome and introductions provided by Brian Marchetti, who is our project manager for the study. He'll go over the meeting purpose and format. He'll go through the presentation. And as you notice, we'll have a poll and Q&A. Now, just to let you know about the poll, the purpose of the poll is to give us a temperature check after we provide the presentation. We'd love to hear what your preliminary thoughts and feelings are, and that's the purpose of the poll. And to begin, we're going to have one poll question, but I just want to repeat again for participants who are joined by phone, you can text your questions or comments to 213-340-8879. And you can send us questions anytime during the meeting. Okay, let's go to our first poll question. Again, this is just so you can get used to this. You'll see more questions will come up throughout the meeting. The first question is, do you live, work, visit, shop in San Fernando? And we ask you to please respond, all the attendees. Check a box, please, whether you live, check whether you work, or check whether you visit or shop in San Fernando. Again, this is our just our first question, so you get used to how the poll works.
It looks like the question is only asking for one answer. So we primarily want to know if you work or shop in San Fernando. So I guess provide one of those. Sorry about that.
That's okay. It's okay. People can choose one or the other. What they is
choose the best option. Yes.
And everyone will get about a minute to answer the questions because we're also translating in Spanish. And we're timing. How many seconds left? We have 10 seconds, I see. Okay. And the response is, looks like 100% of the attendees and responses are people live in San Fernando. So we have a group of residents here. Thank you. So let's move on now, and let's begin with Brian Marchetti, who is our project manager leading the study. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks everyone for being here tonight. We're happy to get to this workshop, second workshop of the project. It's been a long road to get here, both through COVID conditions and moving on slowly from those conditions and being able to present this study within the timeframes allotted by the funding source. So we appreciate you being here to provide your feedback and give us a way forward to finalize the project this month. My name is Brian Marchetti. I'm with KOA. We are a transportation and engineering firm. We are leading the study for the city, doing much of the parking data analysis and some of the solutions. We also have Janice Rhodes here with JP Parking Consultants, who is our expert on parking management and parking pricing solutions. So we will both be presenting some of the content today. So I will move forward with the first slide here, which gives you an overview of the outreach we've conducted so far, the public involvement, the stakeholder involvement. We've been to multiple commissions throughout the city, including the Business Neighborhood Watch group, and the Neighborhood Watch group for the residential areas. We've had stakeholder interviews. We focused on a residential group and those particular issues, and then we did a downtown business owners and employees discussion. And then we had a public workshop back in May of this year for the first workshop before we got into solutions and went forward. And what we've been doing with specific comments received, if you've gone to the website, there's a tool there that allows you to click a point on a map and show it an issue that you'd like documented. So we've compiled those comments. We've taken the comments from the outreach previously, where there was a specific location for those issues, and from some other sources through written comments and things like that. So we've kept track of that. The issues on this map, in case it's not real readable, range from low availability, high demand for parking, loitering violation issues that people have documented, parking pricing and meter issues, corner visibility issues where parking is blocking visibility for vehicles as they travel, overnight parking issues, and parking time limits. So where there was a specific location, we've kept track of those. So throughout the whole process, with our website, the online survey that was active last month and this month, through social media, and through contacts with everyone on the phone and through email and different manners, we received 264 comments over the course of the project so far. In July, we launched an online survey to get opinions on specific solutions and issues that we had identified as we wrapped up the plan. And from that, we received 197 entries. We're going to close that this evening, since we're wrapping up our public outreach tonight with this second workshop. If you haven't taken part in that and you'd like to, let us know. as we get into the question and answers today. And the website comment form for the map will be closed at the same time, so that we can start wrapping up the project in the next couple of weeks. So the findings that we've determined through our analysis, through data collection, we collected data on parking occupancy and some parking turnover to see how long people were parking, like in the commercial areas. We did those back in February, after some of the COVID related restrictions were lifted on commercial activity. It was starting to come around. We know it's much better now. It's not quite 100%, but it was starting to come around from a 50% restriction on businesses. So what we did was we phased in the data collection, doing the residential first, let the downtown come back a little bit. The festival on the weekend had returned, and then we did the commercial area survey. So that's kind of how we had to handle that based on the project schedule to get this to this point this month. But the findings from that data and our analysis going through that, and the stakeholder and public comments. I need to slow down because of our translation. So let me pause here for a second, let you catch up, and I'll go through this slide. The first finding was that, a very obvious one, is that residential areas have high parking demand, both in the on-street areas and the off-street areas. We've looked at, from the street, we've looked at how commercial parking lots look next to our survey areas, and also how residential driveways look in terms of occupied vehicles in those areas. So as we did our surveys, we made notes on how adjacent land uses were using their on-site parking as well. The commercial areas have high demand in some areas with low parking space turnover, meaning that, like close into the downtown mall on San Fernando Road, there's high demand, but there's also vehicles parked there for sometimes 6 to 8 hours. Those are key parking spaces that support the commercial areas and allow visitors and customers to come in and out of the downtown. So if those spaces are occupied all day, you don't get that great turnover that you should get from a parking space where it's used 2, 4, or 5 times a day. So we looked at some of that data and saw some issues there. We looked at the corridor specific plan, which was the downtown area land use plan, also including the Maclay corridor, northeast and southwest in the city. That was the corridor specific plan. It was adopted by the city in 2017. So what we did to factor up our data, we looked at, first, for existing conditions, we looked at what had COVID done, and we looked at sales tax data. Now with restaurants and retail, there can be curb pickup, there can be ordering, picking up food and things like that. But we looked at the differences, and there was a downward trend in business activity by up to 30%. So we raised our data by 30% for the commercial areas to try to get some normal aspects to that data. We also used that corridor specific plan to look at future land use increases, with parking demand being increased by new land uses coming in, and that's about 30% was the high range. But we looked at all different zones throughout the city that we could get from that corridor specific plan. So we factored the data twice to both look at more normal data for existing conditions and then projections out through the specific plan. Now, one of the things we're looking at in the PMMP as we finalize it is helping commercial uses work well in the downtown area, where you have parcels where you can't provide parking on site and they need to share parking with from the public on-street parking and the public parking lots in the downtown. So we're looking at ways to change parking standards there are some city code aspects that do help in this regard, but we're recommending a more comprehensive use of shared parking where businesses coming in can do an evaluation both of data from this study and then also data that they may need to update as part of their development permit, and they can look at sharing that parking or otherwise helping the city to provide more parking when it's needed in the future. So there'll be future updates to this. It's the PMMP document, the Parking Management Master Plan document. That's what we're producing this month. This is not going to be a document that just is the 2021 parking plan and that's it. This will need to be updated in the future, not only because some of this data was collected during COVID and we needed to factor it, but also just because time goes on, trends and demand changes. So this document will be updated both through development applications as they update data for their approval in the commercial areas, but also on a cycle, the city will update this study as they have the funds through grants or other means. It'll be updated in future years. For future parking supply, as it's identified either for near term or in the out years as it gets evaluated again, the future parking supply, whether it's new parking lots, reconfiguring parking lots, or potentially going to structures in the future, those will be funded through private or city sources or a mix of both. But that would come in the future. So that's kind of our overall findings and why we're getting into the next slides, which are really our solutions that we've come up with. So for the commercial area, focusing on downtown a little bit here, just to start there. So the goal that we've come up with in these recommendations is to provide more availability of parking spaces, but managing what's there already. Promoting turnover of spaces, getting those spaces to turn over more that are close in to San Fernando Road. On this graphic, I'm hoping my cursor is showing, but on San Fernando Road, which is the San Fernando Mall, there's the metered spaces on the street. There's city parking lots on the north side along Truman, and there's city lots on the south, a couple smaller lots, and then some larger lots along, I believe that's Celis at that point. So the lots that are closer in really can serve a higher purpose and turn over more, so that when people come into the downtown, whether they're visitors or residents, you can find a spot more readily because those are turning over more, and then basically kind of pushing out that longer term demand out to the periphery of lots. And we have some time limit change recommendations that we've proposed here. But this can also go hand in hand with an employee parking permit program, so that employees could park in certain lots or otherwise use the lots at the periphery. So something we're considering right now, we'd like some input on that, is changing these lots that are close in to San Fernando Mall, lot 5 and lot 4 on the north, lot 12 and lot 11 on the south, these smaller lots on the south, going to like a 3-hour time limit where those spaces can turn over more. They're not intended to be employee parking. They're more to support the local businesses. And then potentially reducing the metered max time on San Fernando Road and the meters. But something we'll be talking about in technology is that as the city transitions toward higher technology for parking payment, you might have a 90-minute time limit, but you might be able to renew that meter or that pay station payment for another 90 minutes. So it'll support kind of showing people don't park here as long, but you could also extend that. So we'll talk about that as well. It provide a more flexible way to use that parking. So those are the concepts there. There's also some locations on Maclay, the commercial district on Maclay, actually going all the way to the north side of the city, there are some locations where parking is pretty much full during a lot of the day. We'd like to consider lowering the 2-hour parking time limits in those areas for the on-street parking, but still allowing people to use 2-hour parking in adjacent blocks so that we don't create a spillover of that demand, but lowering that so that people that go to coffee shops and services and restaurants on Maclay can find parking a little bit easier, and it'll make it more efficient. So we have a poll of 2 questions related to the downtown area. We can do that now. So the first question is when you drive to the downtown and San Fernando Mall area, how do you feel about the availability of parking? And the answers are very hard to find, pretty hard to find, somewhat easy to find, very easy to find, and I do not frequently go downtown. So we'd like your answers on that. Thank you. We'll just have a little bit more time after translation and give time to get that in there. I think we have about 15 seconds right now, and then we'll do the second question and we will move on. So let's see the results of this first question. Somewhat easy to find is the biggest proportion. We got six votes on that. No one said parking was very hard to find. So that it kind of shows that there is parking available in downtown. It just needs a little bit more management. But as demand grows in the future, there will need to be additional solutions. So we will talk about that more. We can go to the second question for the slide. And the second question is regarding time limits. So just as a little background, like I was presenting, there's parking meters with time limits, and there are some locations where there are time limits. Lot 2 is the 2-story bank structure that has a 3-hour time limit. So there are some time limits downtown, so that it's regarding those. So the question is, where time limits on parking currently exist, how do you feel about the total time permitted? And the answers are parking time limits should be longer, parking time limits are adequate, parking time limits should be shorter, and time limits do not affect me. So please answer. Thank you. We have about 15 seconds left on the poll. We will look at the results. So 5 out of 10 responses, the majority of, or the highest response was that parking time limits are adequate. Next category was parking time limits should be longer, should be shorter, about equal votes for that. And then time limits do not affect me was next on the scale. So we appreciate that. We don't want to make major changes to how the downtown parking works. It's just to get a little more efficiency out of it, but still provide, different levels of parking for people that come in. So as we provide these polls to the group, just wanted to let you know this is just kind of for informational sake. As we go through this presentation, those won't be necessarily incorporated into the report directly. It's not an official city vote on how we're doing this, but it is good input, and we are gonna, it either reinforces or helps us look in a different direction as we move forward. So thank you. We'll have a few more as we go forward. So I will go to the next slide. So residential parking districts, we've come up with concepts here. These are not, this is not an implementable plan that we have in front of us. What we have mapped here, we looked at areas of consistent high demand in residential areas because we have our weekday data for both afternoon and evening, and then we have Saturday afternoon data and Sunday morning data. Those were our 4 survey times. So we looked at consistently high demand throughout those time periods and came up with neighborhoods, if so desired by the residents through a process. These could be the parking districts. This is kind of our take on logical kind of groupings. You want to have this kind of based on a neighborhood. You don't want to have to cross major streets to use parking with your permit. We'll go through this concept a little bit more, but we're recommending residential parking district, kind of a revamp of the process to make it a little bit more accessible to be implemented. There are 2 parking districts that we've shown on the map here. There's one on the west end of the city here above First Street. I don't recall if that's 2nd or 3rd Street, but there is a parking district here, and then a parking district off McClay. That's a larger district. Those were established in the past, and those neighborhoods use parking permits, and there's restrictions on vehicles without parking permits during certain times of day. So we feel these could be expanded. So what we've done, these are our neighborhood areas. We have a concept of 11 potential districts on this map, and through the policy recommendations in our document, we'll be setting forth a potential new way for neighborhood initiated implementation of these parking districts. But if neighborhoods do not want these and go through the process, and it turns out that it's not desired by a certain majority of the neighborhoods, these would not be implemented. But these are our recommendations, and we're providing a framework to do so. And we'll get into a bit more of how this works and why they're beneficial in the next slide. And I believe I'm handing it over to you at this point, Janice.
Yes, thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
As Brian just indicated, those are concept districts because we wanted to review kind of a geographic layout of the city and whether geographically they would be feasible, and we could have districts small enough that it would not become unreasonable for residents to be able to use. while at the same time, we wanted to have kind of that overall framework. One of the things that overall parking program, the residential permit parking program, is that we don't have a lot of opportunities of how we can manage residential parking like we have in the downtown commercial area. We have pay parking, we have meters, we've got lots and on-street spaces. In a residential permit parking program, we only have the residential streets in front of homes, and we have limited resources and limited authority to be able to manage those programs. And one of the things when we looked at all of the work that has been done and what we heard from the community is there's not a clear communication and definition of how residential permit parking programs and districts can be established. So our recommendations and our recommendations are divided into phases. The first one being that through work with the city, they would need to make some minor adjustments to the current residential permit parking ordinance. They'll need to determine the permit issuance. They'll need to determine the petition process, the implementation program, and if there's going to be any cost for permit issuance. And please understand, permits are generally annualized permits, and the only cost that can be assessed for those is the actual cost of issuing the permits and implementing the signs and reviewing the process. So these are not like downtown parking, commercial parking fees. They are very nominal fees on the very low end for residents. The other thing that work will do is be able to go through and assess what kind of and how many permits would be eligible for each household, and understand that this is not a program to put a cap on how many permits or cars that a resident can have. They are to limit the number of permits per household, and not every, excuse me, I'm sorry, not every person or not every household will need permits. If they have off-street driveways, they may not even need permits. It's only if they need permits to park on the street. The second phase would then be the city would communicate the petition process and establish the process for review, certification, the data collection, and holding some community meetings so they can create the resolution for it to go to council. And then the third phase would be, if it's approved, would be the signage plan, the administration of the permit issuance, and the application process, as well as installing the signs. We have a poll on this section, and if we can show the poll question. In your neighborhood, do you feel an on-street parking permit program would provide a benefit? And the responses are, yes, it would provide a great benefit to me and my neighbors. The second one, it would only provide a benefit to my neighbors, but penalize me. It would penalize me and my neighbors. So if you would take a few moments and go ahead and answer that, that poll would be happy. We have about 15 seconds left for answering the poll. And if we could see the results. Looks like overwhelmingly the response is yes, it would provide a great benefit to me and my neighbors. We had the lesser answer of it would penalize me and my neighbors. So thank you. That will help us in evaluating that program. Next slide. Brian, next slide. One of the other overall programs that is extremely helpful for developing a parking program is the parking demand management. This again is in the area of the downtown program management. Things such as Park Once, implementing a downtown employee parking permit program where the employees have a designated area that they would park. Developing a shared parking program, which would be that the city staff would look at areas where there's available private parking that may be available, and establishing some leases with those owners of the private lots where they could be made available during hours when those are not needed, or if they have excess supply to help with the needs for downtown parking. The second phase would be that the city staff would be looking at the downtown meters. We heard quite a bit about the meters, that they're a bit challenging with, they only accept coins and the nickels, dimes, quarters. And the city staff have indicated that they already have in their plans to replace those meters with more modern technology that will allow credit card and debit card payment, along with some use of coins. This also includes optimizing the loading zone use and restarting the San Fernando trolley, and perhaps looking at expanding that. The third phase would be if, we start maximizing the use of the downtown parking spaces, then we start to look at remote parking, looking at reviewing and expanding the electric vehicle charging stations. You have the Tesla location now, but these would be standard EV charging stations that would accommodate different vehicle types. The shared parking program to continue that, potentially a valet parking program if needed, looking at remote parking, and then a wayfinding and guidance program, so that guests and visitors who are visiting downtown can easily locate the parking lots that are available. Next slide. Right, there we go. The overall parking meter technology, again, the initial phase is looking at the parking industry, vendors, and what is available, and whether it would be PayStation, that is a centralized payment machine where it would serve a number of spaces, or continue with the meters and replace the outdated equipment. Second phase would be to adjust the payment schedule and offer mobile payment strategies. That's where you would be able to, with your credit card payment, be able to get text messages or messages to allow you to add time on your meters. And then we need to improve the maintenance, the collection, and the enforcement. and have the handhelds and the softwares for the enforcement. We have our last question. If we could pull up for our last question this evening. In downtown or on Maclay Street, how would you like to pay if parking charges were implemented? The answers are use a centralized pay station or use a meter at each spot similar to the current program. So if you could answer those questions, that would be helpful. We have about 15 seconds left on the question and answers. And let's take a look at what the results are. It looks like a pretty even split there. But it looks like there's a few folks that are interested in the centralized pay station, but there's also a pretty even split of continuing with the same meter at each spot as you currently have. And our next question, our next slide.
I'm so sorry, Janice, if I could interrupt for just a second. We need to make an announcement about how people can listen to the Spanish interpretation. Thelma, could you do that, please?
Yes, and I did answer the person asking. Para las personas que quieren escuchar la reunión en español, por favor, vaya al final de su pantalla de Zoom y va a ver ahí un círculo, un mundo que dice Interpretation. Si usted presiona ese mundo, puede cambiar al canal que dice Spanish y entonces podrá escuchar a nuestro intérprete. Muchas gracias.
Okay. And the overall review of the parking prices, we're not going to recommend any change in your current meter rates in downtown. They are comparable to pricing in other communities surrounding San Fernando. So we don't believe at this point in time that any adjustments in parking pricing is needed. In the future, you know, we recommend that occupancy and turnover be continued to be monitored, especially as the economy comes back and your businesses resume their normal operations and you have new businesses that open in the downtown area. And what we call that evaluation is demand-based pricing. And what we're looking for is maintaining an 85% peak occupancy. We don't want the parking occupancy on any of these streets or the parking lots to reach 100% because that becomes very frustrating for the parkers if they can't find a space. So we really try to maintain a goal of 85% peak occupancy. And then we look at the pricing to create turnover based on that data-driven structure for parking lots and the long-term parking needs. And Your time limits might go up or they might go down. The pricing might go up or down to maintain that 85%. But that's the goal that we're trying to achieve when we work with determining the pricing for parking. And then there is the potential of looking at pricing for employee parking permits. And there's a whole there's an analysis process that we would use for establishing rates for any employee permits. Brian, I believe I'm going to turn this back over to you.
Yes, thanks, Janice. So I'm going to give you the results of a different poll. This was the online survey that we had accessible on the website, and we had sent out through social media and email. So hopefully you took part in that, but we'd like to hear if you didn't get a chance to take part in that when we get to Q&A. So out of about 15 questions, I pulled out a handful of the key questions to provide some results. So these are the results of the online survey to date. So this question was, what was the issue that you commonly experience with on-street public parking? And you were allowed to check all that you felt apply to you. Low availability of parking was the highest by far of the response at 84%. The other one's a bit lower. The next one down in terms of responses was corner visibility issues, where vehicles are parked up to the corner of the road and you can't see around to see oncoming traffic. That was the second most common response. And the other ones were available parking is far away from me. Overnight parking is an issue by other vehicles parking multiple nights overnight, and then loitering and violations were seen as well. So thank you for those responses for those of you that use the online survey. This was a question about the permit districts, and is a question of what times of day would you like to see it implemented. So if it's an overnight parking restriction, you might have a sign that says no parking from whatever, it might be 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. And then the rest of the day, it would be open parking so that you control the overnight parking. And so that's an example, but that was the highest response, was overnight parking should be the target for that at 78% of the responses. Evening assumed to be, from dinner time, end of work for most shifts, into the overnight period was the next most common response. Another question that we pulled out from the online survey was choose 3 solutions that could help solve the parking problem. The highest response was provide parking permits for residents. And so that was one of the highest responses. The next one down, well, there's the tie here. The tie between encourage residents to use on-site parking, meaning driveways, parking lots in an apartment, condominium complexes, and allow private driveways to be expanded or reconfigured. That was one of the next responses down. So that was a residential parking focused question. I think this is the last question that we pulled out from the online survey. The final one here was, what is the issue you commonly experience with on-street public parking or city public lot parking? Much as you indicated today with the poll during the presentation, the highest at 80% was low availability of spaces and high demand. Although I think the highest was that I can generally find parking in the downtown area. So as a little bit different response here. The next one down is that available parking is far from the destination. 35% responded there. The next one's parking seems unsafe. Of note was at 27%. Parking time limits are too short and parking meter fees are too high receive some votes there as well, but at a lower percentage. So that is our overview of what we've done to date on the project, where we're going on our recommendations for the PMMP document to be finalized this month. And just as a reminder here, we're going to get into a Q&A period, and we've started responding within the Q&A chat feature already, but we'd like to continue that and get into more detail on those questions. So we wanted to remind you on this slide of where the Spanish interpretation is available through Zoom, through a separate channel on Zoom, and that you can use the Q&A function, the button, and to remind everyone that you can, for people that are listening on the phone and do not have video access, you can text your questions and comments to us. We're going to monitor that throughout the period of this meeting at 213-340-8879. Let's see if I'm missing anything. I believe that's it. So I believe we can get into the question and answer period. Catherine, do you want to start us off on that, or any other details we need to cover?
You know, what I'd like is, I want to make sure that we have a chance to translate this. So I'd like Thelma to read the questions in English.
Very good.
So, and they look mostly like comments, but I want to make sure that we're listening, and I want to make sure that the attendees know that we do have representatives from the city at this meeting. And I'd like to introduce Nick Kimball, who is the city manager for the city. And then we'll move into translating the comments.
Thanks, Catherine. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm guessing that was my cue to turn on my camera and say hi. So, hi everyone. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. And we're happy and excited to receive your feedback in this final town hall. So please ask as many questions as you need to gain a better understanding of this process. Thanks.
Question 1, I'm going to go ahead and read the translation. The city of San Fernando needs to send, or I think it's comment 1. The city of San Fernando needs to send information to all residents because not everyone can or knows how to use Zoom and the surveys in English. And just to respond, I'd like to make sure that everyone knows that you can access this meeting on your cell phone, and you can send in your comments and questions by text. So that was a possibility, and it was promoted in all the flyers. So you don't necessarily need to use a Zoom feature. So are there any other comments about that? Okay, we have another comment I'd like to read. Let's see. There was an email question requested to be read, and I am Jason Hayes, chairperson of the Parks, Wellness, and Recreation Commission for the city of San Fernando, he writes, and I live at 701 North Hager Street. My concern is creating permits for neighborhoods is that it punishes people around San Fernando in various neighborhoods. Those in neighborhoods with single family homes currently listing 800,000 and above are the ones pushing permits. Those I spoke to in neighborhoods with multifamily homes or single family homes listing below 800,000. C permits. Sorry. I'm so sorry, it's hard to read this. C permits is just being returned to be able to have family and friends over to our homes in small vaccinated gatherings. Now we're proposing that we have to pay an annual tax for our families and friends to park in order to visit. Perhaps we have lots of open parking lots. Perhaps we should maintain these spaces and improve our walking spaces before taxing the middle and lower income families in San Fernando.
So Janice, I was wondering if you could provide, or Brian, provide a little feedback on sort of the, you know, again, there's a lot of policy decisions that would need to be made going forward. It doesn't, you know, we could charge, and again, the nominal fee you typically see is usually, you know, maybe 1 or 2 free permits, and then, you know, $15, $20, $25 each additional permit. They could be no charge for permits, and it's only, you know, 2 per property, or there's some certain number. The idea is not necessarily to, especially in the residential areas, to you know, generate revenue. The idea is to limit the number of parking, or create a more equitable distribution of parking in the streets, so that there's not one household that has, you know, 8 cars parking in the street, and so that other households can put 0. So it's more of an equitable distribution throughout residential areas than it is, you know, trying to discourage, you know, parties or taxing any sort of gatherings. But Janice and Brian, if you could maybe talk about how other cities have used these and sort of the idea behind the parking permit system.
Okay, I'd be happy to. In other cities, there's a variety of payment structures that are set up, or permit structures. In almost all cases, there is a limited number of visitor passes for each household, and those, like 1 or 2, 3, those are always, in my experience of working with other cities, there's no charge for those visitor permits. There, you know, in some cases, households will not need to park vehicles on street, and they may choose to not have permits and would not pay for anything unless they needed permits for the extra vehicles. When we talk about a nominal fee, we're talking $12 a year. You know, it equates to $1 a month. I've not seen any city where, you know, the permits run above $25, Nick. They generally are very nominal fees. I've also seen what we call a graduated structure, and that is, you know, your first 1 or 2 may be free, and then if you purchase additional permits, there's an escalating fee for those kind of excess permits above the minimum. So there's a variety of ways for these structures to be addressed, but the intent is they're only going to cover the permit issuance, and there's one, you know, this permit issuance is once a year. It's not like we issue permits every month or every day. So that's why the cost can be very low, is that, you know, you're only doing this once a year.
And then part of that question too was about employee parking permits, I believe.
Yes.
So yeah, in the downtown area, we're just looking for solutions to make parking supply a little more efficient. We're not recommending that employee parking permits be implemented now. It's more of an option. It's more of an option to consider for the future. So yeah, we don't see that as something we'd implement immediately. And yeah, there could be options where employers, pay for those parking permits, but it's more of a way to make the downtown parking more efficient. As downtown grows over time, there could be a real shortage in supply if new parking doesn't keep up. So there might be just more ways to manage parking downtown in the future, and that might be one way to do it. But it would only really apply to like the downtown mall area and some of the other areas of downtown, but it wouldn't be a citywide requirement for employee permit parking. So just to clarify, hopefully.
Well done.
And then there were other comments in Spanish. One of them is, when my neighbors call some members of the council, they do not return their calls about this issue. And the next one is in Spanish, is that residents are not in agreement about having to pay for parking because we already pay a lot of property taxes to the city. And then a comment came in from text. I live in an area where a permit program isn't being recommended. Big concern that adjacent neighborhoods would be inclined to park in my neighborhood. Why wouldn't the whole city be included?
Sure. Yeah, those are concept areas just to show how you could possibly cover the high demand areas based on our survey data. But certainly you wouldn't want to establish a district and then a block over there's prime parking that people will suddenly fill up because it's not permit parking. So yeah, there would have to be a process to go through to clarify those districts, and these are not the recommended districts to be put into like city code or something like that. These are just kind of the potential. So as neighborhoods go through the process, if they do desire the permit program, you go through the process and those boundaries would be defined, and likely you would kind of fill in those areas between major roadways so that your neighborhood is fully protected, and you include all of those residents in the process and the voting on those districts. So that's a good point, that would probably be a second look that would be taken for those districts.
Yeah. The districts are actually established as part of the petition process and through those community meetings. And there's nothing in what we have in this report that restricts any area that we haven't covered or shown in a map. The residents initiate the need for a permit district through the petition process, and any of the residents on a street are eligible to initiate that. Our mapping is not intended to restrict any area from not being inclusive or included in a district.
And another comment is, we need another meeting because few residents know about this study here in the city of San Fernando, and should include business owners, schools, and restaurants. And then another comment.
Catherine, before you move forward, I want to make sure we address some of these. So Brian, can you just recap for everyone on the call? The outreach efforts, I believe there's been a number of these town hall meetings. I think we had a booth that was set up at one of these street fairs to answer questions. So if you can just go out, and then we've had stakeholder meetings with particular groups, including the Mall Association and other businesses. And so please, if you can just take a minute and just go over that so people know what outreach efforts have gone on. So
yeah, earlier we went through some of the commissions and the different outreach that we did in the stakeholder meetings. But yeah, we've also been out in the community to get information back. We've put out boards that show that the informational boards that show that the survey is going on. We put those in the downtown area. I think we put those at library and the civic center as well. Correct me if that's wrong, but we put boards out to kind of advertise where people are walking and traveling. We don't have the ability in a study like this to send out like a project mailer to every household, every business. It's cost prohibitive. You'd never be able to fund something like that on a typical study budget. So we've used the social media, we've used the city website, we use the outreach meetings and the stakeholder meetings. We did that outreach on informational boards throughout the city, and we attended the downtown street fair there at San Fernando Mall to get involvement, hand out information on the project, and get people pointed to the online survey. So do you want to expand on any other efforts, Catherine, like particularly like our email and social media outreach to try to reach people in the middle of COVID and having limited ability to contact people directly?
Oh, I think you covered it well. I just want to point out, we also did ads in media as well as social media, Facebook ads. And we really counted on also the support of community residents. I want to point out that Marcela Rodriguez has been very helpful, and we appreciate that in getting the word out to her neighbors. So
I
thank
also
you.
want to add that we did contact the principals from several schools, and we did send them the electronic flyer so that they could pass it on to their parents and to their staff.
That's right. So there's another translated question. Is that right? Oh, Catherine's offline. I think this is in the right order. So there was a translated question that we've translated so we could cover it here. Also, please take into account when there are large housing developments and how it affects the residents of the city of San Fernando now and in the future. For example, in Glen Oaks, they removed the parking lots. I think I remember that coming up, that specific issue on Glen Oaks about some of the apartment complexes and not providing the parking supply that's needed on site, but also in older complexes, sometimes there's only like one space per unit, which we know is not adequate these days. But those are older developments, and they're what we call grandfathered in, so they're still allowed to operate that way. But the non-use of off-street parking, which is the parking lots of apartment complexes, driveways, and other things, that is something the city would like to work on if that parking is not being used, because that then just pushes the demand onto the street. So we recognize that. We've also done, through those land use estimates, they include kind of the growth, the expected growth of residential areas for a number of years into the future. So we've incorporated that into our parking demand estimates to see what that would look like. That would include like accessory dwelling units that are becoming popular now through state law. You can build second units. That's included in those kind of residential population increase estimates, and then just kind of the overall demand for future development. So we understand that, and we've incorporated that potential growth that can exacerbate some conditions. We've included that in our data.
And then another question is, currently the city is only providing 2 residential permits. Perhaps the city could charge a small fee for each permit and disregard limit if you are able to provide evidence that vehicle is registered in permit-only areas. It's not fair that if you have multiple vehicles with no off-street parking available, you'd have to park blocks away from home when there is parking available near your home. And that was texted to us.
Do you want to start about the fee issue on there, Janice?
Well,
Or how do you want to start that?
That's another great suggestion about fees. And as your permit districts begin to be implemented and you have the petitions and your community meetings, all of the dialogue that we're having tonight will also provide that opportunity where the dialogue can be communicated at the time that the consideration is being given for each district implementation. There does need to be a limit on the number of permits. You know, we need to have a balance between the number of permits issued and the number of available parking spaces on the street, and why most all communities will put some kind of cap on the number of permits that they issue per household. You can imagine how frustrated everyone would be if there's so many permits out there and there's no spaces available for parking, and you're pushed further and further away to find an available space. So as these permit districts are being discussed as a community, when you get ready for implementation and you're having those discussions, you want to keep that in mind, that you have to have a balance of permits and spaces so that they don't get so skewed where the residents with permits won't have a place to park.
Is there any other comment related to that that you'd like to add, Brian, or anyone else?
Yeah, so we understand the comment and the concept. It's a burden when you don't have parking available off street, as you say, is a proper term for it. You don't have parking on your site, but the parking districts do have to recognize what parking is available as they're formed, and there be sort of a population of vehicles that could be parked on the street. So it's a way to match demand with supply on the street. So there may be times where a resident cannot get all the permits they'd like, but it'll be an appropriate number of permits based on the parking that's available in the district as it's formed.
And then another comment is, was the timeline given as to when we could possibly see this implemented?
We haven't discussed that at this point in time. We talk about phases, and a lot of it will depend on how quickly the city staff and the community and the council moves in implementation of this. You know, we're not trying to define that, you know, it's going to begin next year, mid-year, because there are things that have to be prepared for the ready before the implementation takes place. And there needs to be communication, you know, to the entire community or the neighborhood where a district is being discussed. And there needs to be adequate opportunity for meetings and discussion by the residents that live there and how this will all affect them. So we've not put a month and a year on a schedule at this point. It has more to do with how quickly both the city and the community can move forward with these kinds of things. But after those community meetings, it still has to be reviewed, discussed, and approved by resolution by the city council. And then the staff will have to prepare all the implementation. So it's not a short-term, meaning just a few months process. It does take some time to properly have the discussion with the community, reach consensus, have the approval process, and then implement the programs.
Okay, then another question is, how will parking be addressed when the downtown is at full capacity? Meaning when all space is leased, including new development. Since this study was taken during a pandemic, nothing is at normal, and that's in quotation marks, capacity.
Okay, yeah, I can start on that one. I think after this answer, I think we might need to go back and cover some questions we may not have covered before. I don't know if we have those flagged. But
Yes.
I will start here. So we're looking first at existing conditions to see what it looks like, you know, how the parking can be managed better. The first thing to look at, so that you don't spend a lot of money on new spaces that don't get used, is to see if you can use the existing supply more efficiently, and get more vehicles parked within the supply that you have. Something that'll be in the PMMP is that land use projection that we've done based on the specific plans, but also kind of known or envisioned major projects in downtown. Some of the major spaces, as you're alluding to in the comment, that are sitting there either underutilized or vacant. We're adding that demand in to see what that looks like, so that we have a picture of when those come online, and a theory that all those could come online in the future, a future date. Then we're looking at, is there enough supply? Even with good management, does new supply need to be considered? And those developments would need to help in that regard when they come online, assumed to be a bit in the future. It may not be able to use this study data directly. There may need to be some updates. They would use that, and then there would have to be a determination if new supply is necessary, how that gets funded, both through the developments and through city sources. That's not something we're getting into the logistics of that in this study, but those costs would need to be figured out, because the parking costs, and there was a allusion to parking structures, which is a many-fold increase in the price per space. The funding of those, if needed in the future, would need to be figured out. So we are incorporating some of the envisioned major developments downtown, because we know those spaces are vacant. Let's see, did I cover that whole question?
Yeah, hey, Brian, as part of that question, there's another question about that says, why not create multi-level parking structures in the mall?
Right.
I think part of that you started to, I think one important thing to note, just, you know, for the sort of expense of developing parking structures, you know, I've heard it tends to be $30,000 to $50,000 per space.
Right.
So if you look at 200 spaces at $30,000 a space, you know, that's $6 million. So you know, I just wanted to point out that they can be relatively costly to develop. So again, you can always look for different financing sources and grants and that type of thing, but it is an expensive endeavor.
Yeah. And I can add to what Nick just shared, that many of the cities that all of you may have visited that have public parking structures, they were funded when we had the redevelopment agencies in place, and that funding to construct those parking structures were through that source. We no longer have those redevelopment agencies, so it becomes more challenging for city staff and the council to find the resources to pay for those parking structures.
Thank you, Janice. Another concern, well, let me just read this. My biggest concern is permits in residential areas.
Yeah, we understand that. I don't know if the question is about the fee structure potentially for permits, or just the logistics of implementing that and the effect it might have on your daily parking. But we're coming up with solutions that we feel would help the overall parking situation, so that residents have a place to park, rather than the parking supply being overloaded and kind of a free game for people, so that, you know, as many vehicles as are owned get parked on the street. So it's trying to trying to get to a solution for that parking issue, which is only going to go away and has been a rather focus of people. It's an issue that people really care about. So the parking permit program, as it's developed further, will take into account what's viable in terms of economics. And as Janice said, you can only charge for the actual fees, the cost of putting the program together. You can't charge more than that, and that is fair, but that's also law. So that would be considered, and the whole process for each permit district would be a public process, as Janice indicated, and that's both state law and how the city code would implement this. So there'd have to be public meetings, there'd have to be surveys of the residents. You need a super majority to implement it. So there'd have to be a process to go through. So there'd be more steps than just what we're recommending today. So hopefully that process would decide yes or no if something is appropriate for your neighborhood.
And I hope that addresses your concerns. I suggest if you want more specific information, that you let us know what specifically about the permits is a concern for you, whoever submitted that question. And then we had another comment that I had skipped over earlier, and I apologize. It was submitted in Spanish. And the comment was, council members need to answer residents' concerns. So again,
yeah, thanks. And I think there were a few related to, city council and having access to council members. I did want to mention that the perfect opportunity is actually coming this Monday. This presentation, it will be provided to the city council at the city council meeting, which is in person at the council chambers at 6 p.m. This coming Monday. Council will be hearing the same presentation, providing feedback, and ultimately adopting the final plan. The recommendations in the plan will all have to come separately for adoption. So it's not like as soon as they adopt the plan, none of these, all they are doing is just approving it, just accepting that the final product. None of these recommendations will be immediately implemented. They'll all need to go through separate processes before anything gets implemented from this report. But again, this Monday it's going to City Council. There are a number of ways you can submit an email, which would be read into the record if you submit it by 5 p.m. to the city clerk. You can also call in, or you can make a public comment live. So again, that's this coming Monday city council meeting.
another comment that was submitted is in Spanish is also, please take into account when there are large housing developments and how it affects residents of the city of San Fernando now and in the future. For example, in Glen Oaks, they've removed the parking lots.
Oh, I had answered that one.
Oh, sorry. And then the next one is, how would home gatherings that need more than 2 visitor parking passes be handled? It's very common that residents host large gatherings. This is again the permit related to the permit process.
Yeah, and I guess some of that issue is that you could just have overnight parking restrictions when the permits apply. I don't know how late the parties might go, but most cities that use this tool have, like I said, the parking restrictions are late at night. Sometimes it's just a few hours, just to get people to not leave those vehicles on the street overnight, or use that parking and try to get their vehicles on site as much as possible. So that could be the solution there, is that if the neighborhood implements just an overnight parking restriction with parking permits during those hours, that would pretty much solve that, where if you have a party going till afternoon till 10 at night, or you have a gathering, it won't matter. You just have to remind people, get in your cars by a certain hour. So it could possibly be handled that way if the neighborhood decides based on to have overnight parking restrictions only. That could be solved that way.
And another comment is, I don't think there's been enough sufficient outreach. Many in the community have been impacted by COVID, and we are seeing homes being occupied by multiple people. Adding a permit limit is absurd.
So there's a couple issues in there. We've gone through the limitations we had on outreach, but also kind of gone through the many aspects that we use to outreach to the community, all the different tools and going to events and things like that to try to get the word out as much as possible. There's always limits on what you can do. So if there's been some people that didn't know, or if you didn't know until recently, we apologize, but we did what we could within the scope of our work here and within the project and the tools that we had. Let's see, I'm looking at the wrong comment. Oh, sufficient outreach.
Yep.
We are seeing homes being occupied by multiple people. We understand. The permit limit, I mean, the permit limit would apply if the neighborhood organizes, goes through the process, and it's decided that it's something that the neighborhood wants to do. If the neighborhood does not want to do it, there wouldn't be any permit limits. But in order to solve the large issue of just too many cars being parked on the street in residential neighborhoods, that's really the tool to use. The limit on permits hasn't been decided. That would be decided with each study. But I just want to make the point that it's not decided that these will be implemented and there'd only be 2 permits available per household. That would have to be decided through each neighborhood.
What's his name? When you told me about.
Oh, and I just wanted to reiterate, and maybe this is what Janice was going to say, but what Janice said earlier, I think, is a very astute observation. The way, if we're going to fix the overcrowding of cars in residential neighborhoods, it's a pretty simple calculus. You can't have more cars than there are available spaces, or it's not going to fix the problem. So if we don't, if there is not an implementation of some way to limit the number of cars that are able to use those spaces, then there's no way to fix the problem. If you do have permits, then you can at least start to address the demand end of it and how many cars there are that can park in there, and that will create supply and a more equitable distribution for all people that live in that neighborhood. So, this is sort of the best tool available at the time that we have right now are these residential parking permit caps, irrespective of the cost, which again is relatively de minimis if there's a cost at all when we start implementing these.
Again, let me add to what Brian and Nick have said, and that is that no permit district can be created without the initiation by the residents through a petition process to the city for the process to begin. It does not, and all of that process, it's not approved for implementation until the city council approves it by resolution. What the parking permit district in essence provides for the city. Right now, the city staff, police department, they'd have no way of enforcing parkers that may be parking in your neighborhood that don't belong there. The residential district and the permits allows and creates a methodology for the city to be able to assist the community in managing the on-street parking. So that's why, and the state delegated that to each local community, so you develop it to and set it up to match what each particular district fits their community and neighborhood best. And it may be different for each district of what the neighborhood reaches a consensus on.
Okay. Then I'd like to say the next 1, 2, 3 comments again relate to outreach, and the first one was text to us. I would like the study and outreach to be expanded before going into any further phases. And I think Janice just addressed that, but do any of the project team members want to comment on that?
I just wanted to provide a general response to that. I mean, basically what we're recommending in this phase, which is, you know, the initial master parking study for the city. The city has never done this before. So this is the first time the city has done this, but our recommendations range from those fixes potentially to downtown parking limits, a framework for the residential parking permit program to move forward at a higher level, parking requirement changes for certain districts within the city, a framework for shared parking by new development in the downtown area. So these are a lot of just kind of initial recommendations. We're not even recommending a change in any pricing structure. So the policies and the recommended code and policy changes are all phased in the study, which you'll see. But there's no hard recommendations in there now. We're talking about trying to just make the existing parking supply work better. So to do another study as you're recommending or kind of expand this study will be updated again in the future. Like I said, either through data that developers provide as they do the parking studies for each development, that'll be incorporated. And the city has envisioned a cycle to update this in the future. So this is the initial foray, and there really won't be many physical changes coming about with our phase 1 recommendation. So I just wanted to kind of provide that kind of frame of reference.
Brian, I'm going, and I hope it's okay with you, city manager as well. I'm going to read the text that came in almost immediately when you were responding, Brian, and then I'll go to the questions, the other comments about the outreach. But the text comment that came in is, I don't think the problem is within downtown or the mall, but more within the residential streets since permits are required.
Sure, and yeah, we recognized through the surveys, we knew it was done with some COVID restrictions in effect, that the downtown commercial area, the Maclay commercial area, those issues are not as pronounced as the residential issues. So I understand your comment. We're just trying to come up with solutions for both. The downtown still has some room to grow. As commenters have said, they can generally find parking, and they don't think that the time limits are burdensome or anything downtown. It's more the residential areas where we've gotten most comments. You're commenting on that today, so we understand. But we're just doing this master parking study, so we're dealing with both of those kinds of land uses.
And then I'm going to address three comments that were brought up again about the outreach. And one of the first comment is, it wasn't enough. My family and I just found out, and I'm sure I'm assuming it's related to the outreach. And then another comment is, we were locked up and less than 20% know about this. And then another concern expressed was, most of the schools were closed. So. Yeah,
we understand about the outreach, and I think we've covered that. But you know, if there's more specific comments about that, but we covered as much as we can with the tools that we have, and did outreach through 2020 and 2021. So we've been out doing the outreach. I understand if some people didn't get notified. So the issue with most of the schools were closed. We weren't just looking at data for weekday daytime. So we have weekday evening data, we have Saturday, we have Sunday morning, data. So with the schools being closed, that only affects the weekday daytime data. And we know people weren't traveling as much, so we understand that the residential data may actually be higher than what it was like maybe back in 2019. But from what people are saying and the feedback we received, it is a real issue. So we understand that there may be a bit of a gap in the data for weekday daytime, but that more people were home. But we feel we covered it with the different time periods and a conservative analysis.
And here's a comment too. Also take into account when there is an event in the city where families attend, like a Christmas event. And I again believe it's related to outreach. If it's not, please correct me. But I think that what they're suggesting is maybe when there's an event in the city, like an event when we're able to attend and have face-to-face again, I think they're suggesting that maybe it could be used as an outreach event.
Yeah, I didn't know if that was a demand question or not, but there would have to be kind of a program developed for when there's the downtown street fair and other things going on at how the city lots would work during those time periods, because that's a different situation than day-to-day operations. If it's outreach, then
It
that's
was
understood.
outreach,
Okay.
Brian.
Okay.
It was outreach, yes.
Sure.
So that would be when COVID-19 restrictions are lifted, that would be a great opportunity. Another text question was, before any parking structures are developed, how would you recommend the number of spaces to be created?
Right. And we don't have any identified situation where under existing conditions that the downtown doesn't have parking supply. It's just it's available in certain areas that are a little bit farther away. But we are looking at those potential kind of envisioned developments for downtown, and if we identify a parking shortage based on the on-street parking that's available and the parking lots, we will identify that potential shortfall of supply, and then we would say how many spaces that would be. We're not identifying like new parking supply locations with this study. That takes more research into, can something be built on an existing city lot? Can it be provided with a new development where they're providing public parking and their own private parking? So there's different solutions, but if we identify something like that in the future projections, we'll say how many spaces that would be, and maybe like the general area where those could be provided. But it would be based on a shortfall of supply based on the demand that we see from existing plus future development.
Brian, to add to that, I think the question is, how would you recommend the number of spaces that are needed? When the downtown businesses are back into full operation and you've got full occupancy, the parking study that's done before determining the sizing and the site analysis for a parking structure, it's called a parking demand study. And it's generally very specific in terms of a geographic area that's analyzed in the downtown. And it's a little bit similar to what we have done. You're doing parking counts, you're doing occupancy turnover counts. And what you're looking for in that kind of a study is where are those specific block by block areas where the net shortfall comes up to a point both for on-street and off-street, and there's a parking shortfall, and all of that gets calculated and summed up into a modeling process that calculates the number of spaces that are needed over a forecasted future period of 5 or 10 years. But what they're looking for as part of that process is reaching at least 85% occupancy in all current parking lots in your own street spaces, because at 85%, if you are forecasting a need for more parking or a shortage of parking, that's when you need to start planning for what is that parking space expansion program looking like?
Want to make sure to remind everyone to speak slowly so we can be,
I'm sorry.
for our interpreter's sake. Another comment, council member Cindy Montanez is in the meeting. She says she's heard from many residents. She'd like to provide her cell number, 818-356-5118, and email cmontanez@sfcity.org if you want to speak before Monday's council meeting. I want to make sure we, again, have time to translate that. The next text is how many signatures are required to establish a parking permit district?
That is prescribed in your city's ordinance, and the cases where I work with cities, it's a minimum of 51% of the signatures on a block face of number of households. It can be as high as 67%. So that's part of what's in your current municipal code, or maybe adjusted as part of the recommendations that we make of adjustments to your current ordinance. But it does need to be included in your municipal code of what that required percentage is.
Okay. Then this was someone who was able to text. What's going to happen when in-person school begins and staff or guests have to park around campus? San Fernando Middle School comes to mind, but since the area will be permit only, will they just constantly be issued a citation or have to park far?
Yeah, and that would only come up if there was like 24-hour restrictions on parking, which isn't very typical when you develop a parking permit district. So if a typical route is taken where it's overnight parking, it won't affect the school. But if it is a 24-hour issue, then something would have to be worked out with the parking around the school or some other kind of situation. But likely the parking permit district won't affect school operations. So we had this meeting until 7:30 originally, but we wanted to obviously stay and hear all the comments. Have we received all the comments or covered all the comments?
We have
one just came in. It's Margarita Servacion, and she's saying that she's left messages to Councilmember Montañez, but she hasn't received an answer yet. And then Patty Lopez is also saying that the other council members should speak with everyone, not just certain groups. These are just comments.
And was that the final translated question, or are we waiting on another one for translation?
No, that was the final.
Okay, I see. Okay.
We can move on, Brian.
So we have a project contact information on this slide, but we've given you the website and different things you can continue to provide comments as you like. But if you want direct project contact We have Thelma's information here, who's been running all of our communications on the project. But otherwise, unless the city, Nick, if you want to add anything, we appreciate you coming tonight. We've taken all of these comments to heart. We understand the issues. These are quality of life issues in the residential areas, and these affect day-to-day life. So we're making careful recommendations to acknowledge all of the different comments. So we appreciate the input tonight as we wrap this up this month. The project is going to City Council on Monday for their regular meeting, where we'll do a similar presentation with perhaps a little more detail on some of the solutions, and that'll be up for City Council comment at that point, and then on to city approval toward the end of the month.
Thank you, Brian. And I was just going to add again that the council meeting is on Monday. And I do just want to make the comment, we do appreciate everyone's involvement in all of the feedback that we've received. I do want to just recognize that this is a foundational document. This is going to create a baseline and some general suggestions for how we move forward under the City Council's guidance on trying to manage our parking resources better. So this, again, adoption of this particular management plan does not immediately put anything into effect. It's a number of recommendations on how to better manage our parking resources. So this is really just the first step. It's a foundational document. It's to a certain extent, it's a living document. Every few years, we will need to take a look at it, especially in some of those areas where the parking counts may have been skewed or may have not been under normal conditions due to COVID, and update some of the parking counts and some of the data. So this is, by no means the last time you'll hear about parking in San Fernando. This is actually really just the first step in the journey that will take, will take many years and input from many of our residents and business owners. So thank you for joining tonight, and we look forward to hearing from you all and seeing you on Monday.
Thank you, Nick, and yeah, thanks to the team, and thanks for all our participants tonight. And we're gonna move forward based on this. And thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Night.
Good night.